Welcome to Grinding the Data. My name is Kevin Scott, and today we continue our expert series with our fourth installment. You're in for a treat today. We welcome in the great Pat Fitzmaurice. Did I say that right?
Fitzmaurice.
Fitzmaurice. Pat
Yeah,
Fitzmaurice.
it's a 50-50, Kevin. I don't blame you.
I've admired Pat for a long time. What I really appreciate and respect in Pat, even more than his intelligent analysis, is his kindness to everyone in the space. We haven't met in person. I do look forward to that one day, but just seems to be a great human, written and podcasted in the space for years, and is now doing his great work over at Fantasy Pros. It's an honor to have you on, man.
Oh, thanks, Kevin. Really nice introduction. I appreciate that. It's been really nice getting to know you too. You're a really great dude, and looking forward to this conversation.
Good deal. Thank you. How is your off season going? Is it going to be kind of a crazy one? Like you kind of working nonstop, or are you going to get some downtime here heading into the off season here?
Oh, I mean, I wish it was downtime, but yeah, it's they hired me as a managing editor at Fantasy Pros, and unfortunately, they want me to do a lot of managing now. So it's maybe a little less on the content creation for the next couple of months, but it definitely ramps up on the managing side. So
yeah, so all the articles kind of flow through you, huh?
Yeah, kind of, and yeah, just wrangling the freelancers and just some other intercompany stuff, and
That's cool.
Yeah, so
well, congratulations on that.
Oh, thanks, man. I guess it's good to be needed, even if it means no rest.
That's cool. Yeah, well, hopefully it'll be a good off season, even if it's still a little busy, and definitely already looking forward to the 2022 fantasy season. I know for me, it always the season itself. There's so much anticipation for so many months, and then the drafting happens, and that's a blast, and then the season just flies by, and then it's like, man, it's already over. But yeah, I'm looking forward to digging in, and hopefully in our discussion here, we can help our listeners really think through how they can process this season and look forward to succeeding in the 2022 season. So the first question I want to ask you is, just looking back on this season, what did you find most surprising or unusual about how it played out? Do you think there were any learnings that we can kind of take forward?
Yeah, I guess just one that jumps out to me is that, like, we saw Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel just blossom into superstars, and normally, like, we get that sort of it happens more at the running back position, where guys sort of emerge from the pack and like get this opportunity and become these top level guys. Like, we don't see it at the wide receiver position as often, especially with guys who, well, in Kupp's case, had already been around for a couple of years, and we thought like established this baseline. So definitely interesting to look at the kind of season he has, and like, where did we go wrong on it? A lot of us had Robert Woods ahead of him, and really no one had Kupp as like a guy in wide receiver one consideration. So have to look at that. And then just the Deebo thing, I think, was an example of where the too many mouths to feed analysis sometimes goes wrong. Like, we looked at that like, oh, Brandon Ayuk had this exciting rookie year, and George Kittle is going to be healthy. There's just not enough room for Deebo to become a thing. But like, not only did he become a star, but like, he did it in this really unique way as this hybrid pass catcher runner. And that's kind of another thing that happened. Like, we saw Cordero Patterson have that kind of value. We saw, like, on a smaller scale, like Jamal Agnew was briefly kind of a thing for the Jaguars in that sort of a role. So maybe that's something that we're trending towards a little bit in the NFL. And then, like, one of the other things that kind of jumped out to me, Kevin, was just like, I know, like, a lot of us in the fantasy, the fantasy analysis game, like, want this to be a passing league. We want the NFL to be more like the CFL, but like, the running game is important, man. And like, it slows down the other team's pass rush. And that old saying about, like, three things can happen when you drop back to pass, and two of them are bad, like, or more than that, sacks, fumbles, and completions. But it's kind of true. And we saw some teams go really, really run heavy this year. The Eagles, Saints, Titans, 49ers, and Colts all ran the ball 50% to 48% of the time for the entire season. And from week 8 on, the Eagles ran 59% of the time. The Patriots 52% of the time, the Colts and Titans 50% of the time, and the 49ers 49% of the time. So, and all of those playoff teams, with the exception of the Colts, who just barely missed.
Right. Wow.
So,
That's interesting.
yeah, it really is. I don't think the running game is going out of style. And
For a while, it did seem like it was.
It did. And I mean, like the Eagles have kind of like weaponized Jalen Hurts, and like when he's in there, it seems to like make some. We saw like Boston Scott, Jordan Howard, Miles Sanders all pop at different times, with Hurts kind of keying it as the RPO quarterback.
Right.
We saw the Deebo Samuel thing and like that unique usage of him. So yeah, the running game's not going away, and we just have to maybe do a better job of identifying teams that are going to really lean into the running game.
Right. Yeah, man, that's really, I mean, I guess you can sort of see when it's going to happen depending on the style of offense that the coordinators typically call, or who the quarterback is, how much they trust him. But yeah, it seems like it was very surprising. I mean, usually when I'm doing projections, I kind of start to tick it up year by year, more percentage passing overall for the teams, right? Like towards 60-40. So that is very surprising that you had some even more than 50% for part of the year. Runs,
Yeah, the coordinators are embracing their caveman tendencies. They're taking us back to the 70s, Kevin.
I guess if it works, I mean that, and like you said with Deebo, it was fascinating and also maddening if you didn't have him in fantasy. Like they're giving this guy the ball every single play, it seems like, but it was working, so why not? Yeah,
it was crazy. I think he had like 6 rushing attempts in his first 8 games, and then averaged like 6.7 carries the rest of the way. So they just kind of decided, hey, we're going to try him this way. And yeah, exactly. And it's
and like you're saying, maybe we will see. I don't know if we can really foresee who people are going to use, but maybe super high athleticism, and you just look for, like we do with running backs, for that contact balance, among receivers who might have that, or I don't know how to identify that, but it'll be interesting to see if that happens more.
Yes.
Yeah, good thoughts, man. I know that you do a ton with ranking players, and I know that you're very good at it. You keep winning these year-long awards. I think that's probably why Fantasy Pros hired you, because you always won their awards. What are a couple of things when you're ranking? I remember asking you when I started ranking for them a couple of years ago, like what your approach is. Are there any things you can share with our listeners about how you approach it week to week when you're ranking players?
Sure. I don't know if I'm qualified to answer this anymore, Kevin. I crashed to like 31st, I think, in the
that's
rankings
still good. There's hundreds of people in there.
So I mean, like, it's just Rich Rebar described this really well when he compared fantasy analysts to meteorologists. Like, we're kind of trying to see things that are far off and how they're going to come over us, and we're wrong a lot of the times. We think this storm front is going to move past, and then something happens and it blows 90 miles south of us and we don't get any rain at all. So like, I think we're looking for trends. We're looking for trends in usage mainly. Like, that's the main thing. Looking at snap counts and targets, carries, number of routes run, and like, usage generally equates to value. Not always, but so we're looking. What's that?
Mike Davis.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Not always.
The poster boy for the running back dead zone. So
right.
Yeah, like, we want to chase the volume, and we're just looking for trends, because we see patterns develop over the course of the season. Guys getting more usage, less usage. Guys like Brandon Ayuk, going into the doghouse and coming out, and the second half of Ayuk's season, after a pretty miserable first half, the second half looked a lot like his rookie year. So, and like, people who were new to fade him early and then knew when to get back on the bandwagon could profit from that this year. So, things like that. So, like, volume to me is always more important than matchup. Like, and I kind of got that from watching some of the smart rankers over the years. Like, I would notice where I had a discrepancy with, like, John Paulson of 4for4, who's a good friend of mine, and Sean Corner, who's another guy I've admired, and Justin Boone, and it seemed like when I was the outlier with those guys, like it was more because of matchup. Like I was
Okay.
fading a guy in a tough matchup or boosting him up because of an easy matchup. But those guys, like I think, were heating the volume. Like what was the probable volume looking like? And more often than not, I was wrong and they were right. So
Interesting.
I kind of adjusted over time, and like I think that's it, man.
How do
If
you,
you
so you're saying you look at volume, potential volume more than matchup. But obviously your rankings are going to change week to week, based on something. So is it more like anticipated volume based on how you see the game playing out in a certain week?
Yeah, I mean, just generally what the offense has been trying to do, how they've been using a guy. Like, I kind of don't think it's necessarily going to change based on maybe a little more for the wide receiver based on an individual matchup. Like, if a guy's running into Jalen Ramsey or something, then yeah, like I'm going to fade him a little bit because of that. But,
Hmm.
that's another thing. People pay a lot of attention to wide receiver cornerback matchups. I mean, to me, they're only maybe like half a dozen
Right.
cornerbacks who really move the needle for me, like to significantly drop a guy because he's going to face that guy. And the other thing is, like, we sort of overestimate how often
Right.
the tough cornerbacks are on guys. We think like, Jalen Ramsey is going to be on this guy like every
Hmm.
snap in every game. I think people are probably expecting Ramsey to shadow Jamar Chase in the Super Bowl, but realistically, he's probably going to spend about half his time on Chase, half his time on Higgins.
Right.
And there's so much zone coverage in the NFL today too that a lot of times it's just kind of whatever zone a guy happens to be running his route into.
Right. And so
So
often now they're pulling their best receivers into the slot, and very seldom do you see a guy like Ramsey go to the slot. I mean, sometimes, but yeah,
right.
I found the same thing. Those matchups are not too important to look at. Even if a guy gets shut down in the first half, they'll scheme him open in the second half. There's so many different things they can do with him. So that's interesting. Do you do full player projections for the whole year, like in the preseason?
So I don't, and
Okay.
I'm kind of the rare guy who doesn't, and I kind of think projections are more useful, and I don't do them in season either, but I think they're more useful in season, especially in like DFS and player props.
Hmm.
Um, I think my issue with projections, preseason projections, is that the injury rates in the NFL are so high, and injuries can just absolutely lay waste to player projections.
Hmm.
Like a guy goes down and the entire offense changes, the entire distribution of touches changes. And I think projections, they give you, there's some value in getting that median look at what you think a guy is probably going to do. Here's the over under for what he's going to do.
Right.
But it just doesn't reflect ceiling and floor that well. And sometimes I want a guy who, if you look at the projections, maybe based on like who else is on the depth chart or whatever, realistically, you can only give this guy 600 receiving yards, right? It's just, he's the number 3 or 4 guy. There are other guys ahead of him. It just doesn't look like he's going to be getting more than maybe a 50% snap share. But this guy's super talented. And if something happens to one of those guys ahead of him, you just know this is a guy who could pop. So, like, I want to
Hmm.
move him up in my rankings. I don't want to be a
Right.
slave to projections in a case like that. So,
Right.
I guess that's kind of why I'm not a projections guy. Plus, Kevin, I went into journalism and writing because I'm, hate doing math. And so, why would I embrace math for this job?
It's
No,
interesting. That is,
I'm just kidding.
I know, but that's very fascinating to me, that you're a guy that is so effective at ranking and you don't do projections. Obviously, some of the people who are also great at ranking do it, and it's part of their process. I just talked with Heath Cummings the other day, a CBS guy, and he basically does everything based off of his preseason rankings, which he then pulls into the week by week rankings, which then, or I'm sorry, projections, which then affect his week by week rankings. So so many different ways to do it. And I mean, obviously, I just wanted to ask you that because you're good at ranking. It's just an example, I think, for listeners that there's lots of ways to do it, and if you are a numbers guy and you like it, for me, the projections are helpful because it gives me a full look at the team team from a team perspective, what do I expect this team to do? Like we were talking about, how many runs, how many passes, what is the potential pie for those receivers or those running backs if it plays out like I think it will. And the thing is, it probably won't play out like I think it will, but at least gives me, like you're saying, a baseline. But yeah, it's interesting that your rankings are just you're just looking at what is the current, or the current kind of trajectory for their touches and their involvement in the game, and what I think is going to happen in this particular week.
Yeah, that's kind of it. And I know there's some guys who like, I think the fantasy footballers are basically faithful to their projections, whatever they stat out, like that is how they do
Oh,
their
interesting.
rankings. And then at least I think I remember that's what Mike Wright and Jason Moore have told me. And then I know guys like John Paulson and Sean Corner have their models and they get their projections, and then they'll do a little manual shifting based on what they think is something just doesn't feel right to them. They'll move guys around a little bit manually to adjust for their instincts. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of different ways to skin that cat.
Yeah, it's interesting. Looking back at I guess the 2021 season and how it played out, I don't know how much personal drafting you do, how many leagues you play in. But how are you kind of thinking forward to the 2022 drafts for your own leagues, or for advising other people as far as how they should prioritize, various positions or draft strategy, anything like that comes to mind?
So I guess I'm kind of a proponent of zero running back or hero running back, and I know a lot of people hate zero running back. It's like controversial. Guys are the basic thought process is like running backs are the most important players on your roster. And I kind of agree with that. Like if you are in the tank at running back, it's going to be hard to win. And like sometimes I will start running back, although I don't think I'm going to do that much in 2022. I'm going to have a ton of Cooper Kupp and Jamar Chase this year, just because I think like Jonathan Taylor is the slam dunk 101. But like
Right.
after that, I'm like, I mean, there's so many questions about all of the running backs, and I think there are just like so few questions about Kupp and Chase.
Right.
Yet I think people are going to be bypassing those guys, for Dalvin Cook and Christian McCaffrey and Joe Mixon, Najee Harris, like all these other guys, and I'm forgetting a lot of them. I think those guys are going to drop to the early round or the latter part of the first round, or even into the second. I'd be totally comfortable grabbing Kupp or Chase as top 5 or top 6 picks. And I just think, Kevin, like wide receivers are the more bankable commodity for the most part. Like you do not see guys come out of the blue that often. I mean, I talked about Kupp and Debo being surprises. Like they were level jumpers. We knew they were good players.
Right.
We just didn't see the stardom coming. But like guys really don't come out of the ether. Guys like, we're not going to see Quez Watkins turn into a 1,200-yard receiver next year. It's just not
Right.
going to happen.
Yeah.
But we see that with running backs all the time. So much of it is
True.
opportunity based. A guy gets hurt at a position where there are huge injury rates. And before you know it, like Jordan Howard is a guy you're dropping 50% of your fab on in your league. And it's just crazy. But like, that's the thing. I mean, it's not that running back isn't important. It's just that like, it's a risk reward thing. And like the people who play fantasy baseball might understand this. Like I equate wide receivers to hitters and running backs to pitchers. Like I think the hitting is a little more predictable over time, and the pitching, like guys, this year's ace is like next year's bum
Right.
who like has a
True.
5.5 ERA. And
Yep.
you almost have to give yourself a chance to get a little lucky with pitching. Like, yeah, get an anchor or two, but then like, don't spend all your money in pitching, because then you're not going to get enough of the more bankable hitters, and you're just going to get swamped there because you're not going to find hitters coming out of nowhere to help your team. You might find pitchers coming out of nowhere to help your team.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I guess that's my take on wide receiver versus running back. And then tight end, it's kind of go big or go home, I think.
Yeah.
Like I was kind of I don't know, like 3 and 4 years ago, I was hitting the mid range of tight ends a lot, and it was a big mistake. It was just sort of, um, the seventh round tight end is something I'm trying to avoid these days. Like, um, I lucked into Dawson Knox and Dalton Schultz in a lot of leagues
Me
this year
too.
because I chose to go the dumpster diving approach at tight end. And those are the exact types of guys I will not be taking in drafts this year.
Right.
Because,
Yeah,
like,
isn't that interesting? Yeah, you're like, I
yeah,
liked you, but I got to move on.
right, right. That's it. Because I think they're kind of going to be outpriced, and now there's a chance that maybe they fall off, especially if Schultz like goes somewhere else in free agency, especially if like Gabriel Davis becomes a star for the Bills and like they throw to Knox a little less. And I'm
And
actually
they could be good, but the price change is a big deal, right?
right, definitely, definitely. So yeah,
It did,
I'm going to be looking for the next Dalton Schultz and
right.
Dawson Knox rather than paying the inflated price for
Yeah.
what they've become.
It did seem for a while to me, as I've drafted over the last few years, like we were going to have a shift at tight end. Like they're going to be 10 to 15 guys that I am happy with, and they're going to be producing at a 10 fantasy points per game plus kind of a range. But it just seems like the hardest part with those middle round guys is it's like a lot of receivers too. You just never know when they're going to perform. So you put them in your lineup and they get you three, and then you're just dying for that guy who's steady and going to give you 10 or 12 every week.
Yeah, and I think the position got a little bit better this year. It wasn't quite as bleak as it had been in the past. Like we finally broke up that Philadelphia logjam with Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert so that they could both be valuable.
But then they
And
both Philadelphia started throwing it 59% of the
yeah,
time.
exactly.
I mean running it 59%.
Yes, yes. So but I still generally am either like if I can get one of the big guys at a reasonable price, I'm not really a first round tight end guy.
Yeah.
That's fine. But for the most part, I'm just kind of waiting and hammering running back and wide receiver in the early rounds. And then I don't know about you, Kevin, but like I think I'm a little more willing to pay up at quarterback than I used to be.
It's really changed, hasn't it? Yeah, I was
Yeah.
always a 10 plus round guy because I feel like there's 32 starters, especially in one QB leagues. I can get a I'll take the 15th ranked quarterback. He's going to get me 16 points a game. But now the differential, like you're saying, between the top, like 7 or 8 and everybody else is huge.
Right. Yeah. You're kind of going to get swamped at quarterback in the quarterback matchup every week if you're throwing Kirk Cousins out there. Like he's going to
Right.
hit a couple of times a season, but if you're constantly running out Kirk Cousins against Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, like you're going to get buried at that
Right.
position. So I'm a little more willing to pay up, and especially since like you can normally get uh, a guy like Jalen Hurts, who was a pretty consistent, like low end quarterback one at a reasonable price. And I think there are going to be other guys like moving into that range this year, maybe Trey Lance.
Hmm.
Like you can still do the position inexpensively, but like I think it requires a little more attention than
Yeah.
in the past.
Yeah, that's the golden goose there is if you can get one of those guys that turns out to be, like if you got Josh Allen a couple years ago and he was going in the 10th round, that's where you can win your league based on a quarterback. And I think this year, yeah, it's probably going to be Lance or Justin Fields because they have that rushing upside. And I don't know what you think about Fields being in Chicago, but I thought he looked pretty good for a rookie being thrown out there with Matt Nagy at the helm.
Yeah, like it looked bad early, but we knew it was going to look bad early. Like all these guys, and I think it's way too early to give up on Trevor Lawrence too.
Yeah.
So like it was rough, but like both of those guys have really intriguing tools. They
Hmm.
both add value with their running, which is something we're all after, obviously. So yeah, I do think that those guys might be this year's bargains.
Yeah. And I mean, it'll probably depend on the draft for me, but I think generally I'm still going to try to wait till those middle rounds on quarterback and try to grab a guy with upside. But it is really shifting. I feel like when I face Mahomes and Allen and Lamar Jackson and some of those quarterbacks, and I have even a guy like Jalen Hurts, I feel like I'm starting at a 5 or 10 point deficit. So it's interesting how quarterback, it feels like you're needing to take earlier, and tight end, it seems like you probably need to take it earlier. And it's getting harder, right? It's harder to find an edge right now, I feel like.
Yeah, and yeah, that's kind of the thing. And I don't mind taking a luxury item at one of those two positions, but I never like getting an early quarterback and an early tight end. Then I feel like I'm shorting myself at the all important wide receiver and running back positions.
Right.
So, and I think that's always going to be a golden rule for me. But yeah, that sort of push and pull between, do I want the luxury tight end or the luxury quarterback is that's kind of a dilemma.
Yeah, I do think, like you were saying with running back, there being so many potential guys that you can grab late. I think that's why the zero running back is gaining steam and why it makes a lot of sense, because you can get a guy like Elijah Mitchell off the wire, people in late rounds who hit. And then, like you were saying, you can't do that with receiver almost ever. It happens with tight end, but not really with quarterback. So yeah, it's one of those things like that. Running back's one of the only positions I feel like you can sort of roll the dice and maybe get lucky.
Yeah. You got to start someone in week one. And I think that's what terrifies people about waiting on running back, that they're going to have to throw out some, third down back.
Right.
They
Giovanni Bernard.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want Naheem Hines in your week one lineup. I get it. But, so that's kind of why, maybe hero RB is the way to go. Get that one guy in either the first or second round, and then, be willing to not have a premium RB2 and, give yourself that chance to get lucky.
Yeah, I'd say the majority of the experts that I've had on here, and you're the fourth, have said that they like hero RB, not necessarily first round, but first or second, grab a running back. So it seems like that's probably the sharp way to draft at this point. I know that you can win anyway if you hit the right players, but I agree. I like that strategy. How many teams do you typically draft in a year for yourself?
Oh man. So, well, I normally try to get in about 20 best balls and, just keep those going as soon as they open. And, like Underdog, I think is already open, and the best ball 10s will be open pretty soon. But then I don't know, I've got maybe 7 leagues that I consider home leagues, and then maybe another 7 expert redraft leagues, and maybe 7 dynasty. It's around 20 leagues that I have to manage. So I'm a little out over my skis, I think, Kevin. And
we all are.
Hoping to maybe pare down a little bit. And I'm to the point where I really like best ball leagues, where I can just manage the roster and not have to worry about waivers and lineups.
Yeah, that's I just asked because I was going to say, when you're drafting, you have these rankings, in the preseason, they don't shift much, right? You rank your players as you're drafting. I assume you do some tiered rankings kind of deal. And I guess my question was, when you have your rankings in front of you and you're drafting from them, how do you handle wanting to differentiate your rosters? And when you got that 20 plus or 30 plus rosters, do you care? If you have a player that you love, well, that's, you have him well above ADP. For me this year was like an Elijah Moore type of guy. I just loved him. I wanted him everywhere. Do you try to avoid having him on 80% of your rosters? And if so, how do you handle making that happen?
Yeah, I do try to diversify a little bit just to protect myself. There might be a guy who maybe I'm not that high on in the off season, the spring and summer, but a lot of other people are sort of on that bandwagon. Ezekiel Elliott was kind of one last year. I was not that big on Zeke, and I kind of let myself get talked into him. So I took him in some late best ball or two, and maybe one of my home leagues, just in case I'm really wrong. And we get the old Zeke, and, I guess not, but then there've been some other guys who, I was off, and other smart people kind of got me on, and I was really glad I did. Debo was one example of that. So yeah, I do try to diversify a little bit. Early in best ball season, it's not that important to me. And, if there are guys I really like, I don't mind getting them on, a third or 40% of my rosters. But, then again, even in my home leagues, like, my stuff's all out there for the public, and a lot of my home league rivals know who I'm on, so it gets harder to get those guys, and I don't have to worry so much about
Yeah.
overexposure on them. So
Right.
yeah, like every once in a while I'll veer and maybe go against my rankings a little bit just for the sake of diversity in my portfolio.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you said, with I had the same situation with Debo. I was not on him at all, and mainly because I really loved Ayuk and thought he was on a trajectory like a lot of these young receivers. Like a Justin Jefferson, who's just going to continue an upward trend. And I think it's hard to know why that didn't happen. Besides getting in Shanahan's doghouse, I cannot tell what Shanahan's going to do. Really, he's kind of one of those very free thinkers as a coach. It could have been that I just underestimated how good Debo was. But yeah, I totally had that same situation where I was off some guys, and then I was like, okay, everyone's talking about him. I guess I'll take him. And I also had a mix of whether when I was happy I did that and when I wish I wouldn't have. So it's really hard to know when you should kind of shift your thinking and when you should hold on to your convictions from the preseason and ignore the noise.
Yeah, Chase was another guy for me. I almost forgot about him, Kevin. Like I almost had no Chase, I think, as of like September 1st
Oh
last year.
gosh,
And then my last few drafts, it was like, well, yeah, boy, he's so cheap now.
he's fallen. Yeah,
Market is, yeah, it's just a huge overreaction in the market. And like there were times where he'd just be sitting around in like the 7th round, like, okay, I gotta grab this
oh
guy. I mean,
gosh,
he's just like too good not to pick
right.
up here. So I got on board him a little bit late. I'm glad because if I had stopped drafting at September 1st, I would have been like, oh my gosh, I don't have this guy anywhere.
There's an argument for more leagues. See, I mean, if you had more, you could have had
Exactly.
Chase on more. No, yeah, I think taking advantage of the shifts in ADP because of the group think or because of the overreactions is also helpful. But yeah, sometimes I just wish that, or I want to find out like what would happen if every single league I ignored what everybody else said and I just went with my convictions. Like, would I win zero? Would I win, way more? It's hard to know. But when you're on Twitter seeing all these conversations, it's really hard to just ignore them because you're involved and it's good to try to see things from other angles too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. You do get pulled a little bit by the tides at times.
yeah. From all of your work in this space, whether it's writing or ranking or podcasting, whatever you've done, what would you say overall is one of the most important things, or a couple of things you've learned this season you're going to take with you into the next season? Again, whether as an analyst or a player.
I mean, I guess I'll come at it as an analyst first, and just as a member of the fantasy community. Like, there's so many smart, funny, and really awesome people in the space. Like, even if especially if you're an analyst or an aspiring analyst, but also if you're just an avid fantasy gamer, like, drink it all in. Follow more people, listen to more podcasts, read more articles. And we just talked about it, Kevin. Join more leagues. Easiest way to beat variance is to join more leagues. And I know some people have, limited bandwidth and can only do one or two, but like, there's like the 30% rule in fantasy football where I think 30% of the people in any draft room, be it in person or online, the Fates have already decided they're not going to win that year. Like they're
Yeah,
going to have the highest opponent points against in the league for the season, which is just certain doom, or they're going to be the team that gets completely annihilated by injuries,
right.
or they're going to be the team that loses every close game they're in and beats people by 30 but loses every game decided by 5 points or less. So like, half the time, well, 30% of the time, fate is just saying no soup for you, man.
Right.
And the more leagues you're in, the better your chances of beating variance. So get in more leagues. You're going to have more fun and be more successful.
Yeah, that's cool. How about if our listeners want to improve? Something I've asked all the other guys I've interviewed here, or maybe they want to jump into higher dollar contests, compete against a stronger group of players, maybe move out of their home league and compete in some of these other big leagues. What would you say? One thing that like the average player you've interacted with, or in your own leagues, that these listeners should work on? What's one thing that, maybe could set them apart from the crowd as they seek to improve?
All right. I'll kind of underscore something that I said earlier and maybe say it in a different way. But like, I think the strongest fantasy managers know that this notion that wide receiver is a deep position is kind of a fallacy. And they draft accordingly, and they like dip into the wide receiver pool early and often. And like I'll get into these chats, like I don't know about you, like in the Scott Fishbowl, when we have the run up to the Scott Fishbowl, there are always chats organized for the people who are all drafting out of the same position, like the 105 chat, like everyone who's drafting 105 gets in, and it's fun. You interact with all these people. People are kicking around strategies. Every year I hear people or see people in those like Twitter chat rooms, like talking about how they're going to wait on wide receiver because it's so deep. And I know the Scott Fishbowl scoring is kind of skewed towards running back and tight end and quarterback a little bit because it's super flex, it's tight end premium, it's half point for first down, which sort of helps the running backs. But then every year I see guys who go extreme zero RB are like among the highest scorers. Like I think there was a couple of years ago where like Anthony Amico didn't draft a running back till like the 13th round, and he wound up leading the Scott Fishbowl in like regular season point scoring. But like, don't wait on wide receiver. It's not that deep. And I feel like that's just such a misconception. And whenever I hear someone saying how deep it is, I almost think like, all right, this person's kind of a fish. Like they're not getting it. They're the fish swimming in the Scott Fishbowl, and it's going to be a rough year for them. But wide receiver is not deep. Like hit that position early and often.
Do you think that it's kind of a paradox a little bit to me, because so many teams are going to 3 and even 4 wide receiver sets a lot of the time? There are so many more receivers who get targets, let's say, 30 targets or more in a season. And at the same time, it's less deep. There's so many more players. But do you think it's those two things are related? Like, because there's more receivers on the field, like the really good ones just separate themselves out more? Or why do you think it is not as deep?
That's kind of it, Kevin, like the multi-receiver sets, and the fact that, the base offense now is a 3 wide receiver set. And so it's more contributors at the position. And it's kind of like spreading out the production a little bit. And that's kind of, I think that some people see that as the reason why a wide receiver is deep. I see it as the reason why it's not deep, because
that makes sense.
There are a lot of these Tyler Boyd 800-yard types. And not that I have anything right. Like, I don't mind having Tyler Boyd as my wide receiver 5, but I don't want him as my wide receiver 3 anymore.
Right.
And it's kind of diluted the wide receiver 1 pool a little bit. There are very few Cooper Kupps and Devontae Adams types. And now we have like, it's almost like a 20-man wide receiver 2 group. And if that's the case, so be it. But get yourself a bunch of those wide receiver 2s. Like then
it falls off fast after that.
You're right. Once you get past wide receiver 30, like it's not, there are a lot of maybes, but there are not many like take it to the bank, sure things after wide receiver 30. So if you don't like have at least 3 guys in your pocket by then, I think you're behind the curve.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And that's definitely something I haven't really been able to put my finger on exactly why that's the case, but it's definitely something that I've felt adding, momentum over the years is like, if you don't get those top guys at receiver, you're toast. Which is, in the past, it was that exact same, feeling, except about running backs, right? Like if you don't get those top running backs, you're toast. And it's really interesting how that's kind of shifted to me, but I think it's probably based on the way offenses have shifted. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for answering those questions. We're going to close out today with kind of a closing exercise where we go through and I'm going to rank with this excellent ranker and see where we fall out here. We were going to rank our top 10 running backs and I didn't even specify this for you, I realized, but I was talking about redraft. Hopefully that's how you took it.
Oh, sure. Yes.
So Dynasty is a whole different animal with this, but yeah, just our top 10 running backs, looking at who we would draft in the, I guess this would be really first, second, maybe third round. So I just want to go through one at a time. We'll compare our lists and see where we fall out. So who did you have as your number one?
Yeah, Jonathan Taylor. I mean, not only is it obvious, but I'm a Wisconsin guy, Kevin, University of
Yeah.
Wisconsin guy. So if I didn't have Jonathan Taylor there, they'd probably yank my diploma.
He is a great player, man. He was, and you saw it coming, but I didn't see his. I didn't know if the Colts were going to give him 80% plus of snaps. I was worried about that for him.
Yeah, can you like if the Chiefs had done what they should have done and taken Jonathan Taylor instead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire? I mean, like I know you're a Chiefs guy, and I know like Sean Siegel, Mr.
Yes.
Zero RB himself, is a big Chiefs guy.
Mm-hmm.
And like I remember talking to him shortly after that draft, and he's like, "I can't believe we didn't take Taylor." Like he knew, he just knew.
I was big on him too. I mean, you could just watch his tape, and he is ridiculous. And for a guy that big to run like that. Yeah, and I do agree. I see that on Twitter. Like, oh, what if the Chiefs had done it? I will say that Andy Reid is really good at ruining running back ones. So it's possible that we could have drafted him and he would be middling. Because he'd stick Darrell Williams out there, and half the time. You know
like,
what I mean?
And I know CEH has this like, well, everyone thought he had this 3-down skill set, but like he sucks at blocking, and you don't want a guy who sucks at blocking out there on third down when you've got the best quarterback in the National Football League. Like you just can't have that. And that was like this fatal flaw of the whole Clyde Edwards-Helaire first round pick.
And the most confusing part with Edwards-Helaire is that they just don't throw him the ball. I remember his college tape, and that was his big calling card. Like the guy runs great routes out of the backfield and good hands. And when they throw it to him, he's been good. But yeah, they just do not design plays for him at all. That's what I mean. Like Andy just runs his things, and whatever it is, what it is. Whoever gets it gets it. So yeah, but yeah, I also have JT at 1. I think that's probably universal. Maybe not. But yeah, he's going to be number 1 for most leagues. Who's your second?
Yes, I'm sure this is where the unanimous picks stop. So I've got Christian McCaffrey number 2.
Okay.
Like and a lot of people are not going to be able to have the stomach for him after 2 washout injury seasons back to back. But he's still young. I know with the workload he's had and the size he has, like it's the injury probabilities are pretty sky high, but I'm hoping they can find more of a happy medium for him where he's not getting 25 to 30 touches every time he plays, and like they can find a way to use him a little more judiciously and hopefully keep him on the field. But man, like whenever he is out there, he is just a total difference maker. And I always get a little leery of drafting around the injury cases, just because if a guy does get hurt, you do get replacement value. It's like I'd rather have a guy who's really good when he's in there,
right,
and maybe gets hurt a lot, than a guy who just like is out there and not producing. And like
Miles Sanders,
Saquon Barkley this year, who you just keep throwing him into your lineup only to have him score 5 points for you.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to take that chance with McCaffrey.
Yep, and he's my number 2 as well. So I'm right on the same page. I think that you just can't find that kind of upside in the receiving game. I when you were saying use him more judiciously, it made me think of Jamal Charles. As a Chiefs fan, I was always frustrated with us giving him 10 to 15 touches, but he was a small guy too, and I think that might have been wise. I mean, he still got injured a bunch, but and he was dynamic when he was out there. I think the hard part is McCaffrey is so far and above their best player on offense. I mean, DJ Moore's good too, but that they want to get him out there all the time. I just can't get a feel on how likely it is that these injuries are going to continue, how fluky it was. And it wasn't this year a hamstring mostly.
Yeah. I mean, he's had what, shoulder, hamstring. There was one other thing, maybe like a hip thing, but like nothing major. He's had like no major knee injuries or anything. So like, that's kind of one of the encouraging things, that like it's been relatively minor stuff and not the stuff that's really going to accumulate over time and take this physical toll. So like no knee, no foot,
Yeah.
That's part of why I'm a little more willing
Yeah.
to roll the dice with him.
Yeah, my only hesitation with the hamstring is like with the Julio situation where it just continues year after year, and hopefully that's
Right.
not the case with him. But yeah, I think we probably both have him too, mostly because of his ridiculous upside, and I think that's a smart pick. Who's your number three?
So along the same vein, I guess Dalvin Cook.
Oh, okay.
And like I was kind of worried about the coaching change, but it seems like O'Connell is also going to be a zone blocking
Yeah,
system guy. So that makes me a little less nervous about any sort of switch. Like I wouldn't have had Dalvin Cook at number 3 if they hired Jim Harbaugh.
yeah,
And so another guy who just gets out there and produces, he's going to miss a couple of games. It's just
right.
built in and you got to be prepared for it, but you will get that replacement value. It's just hard to overstate like how valuable he is when he's out there. Like
Yeah,
when he's out there, he puts up pretty big numbers. And like, I always want to take my shots. If I'm going to draft a running back in the first round, I want a guy who is like, even a tough matchup has 20 to 25 point upside.
yeah. Makes sense. And I think O'Connell used to be with the Vikings a couple years ago, so he already is familiar with Cook, I believe. I have Henry at my third. Another guy with obviously injury stuff going on this year, mainly just because of the insistence of the Titans staff and making him the centerpiece, and maybe that changes at some point. But I just think they want to be a heavy run first team, and he's a beast. And obviously, you got the injury risk, like you were saying. Now with Henry, it's a foot, so that's concerning. But I think the upside because of that, I put him third.
Yeah, so he's my 4.
Okay,
I mean, right
cool.
behind Cook for me, and
Cool.
yeah, like the same things. I mean, now he's going to be going in like his age 28 season or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of we're getting perilously close to the age cliff with
Yep.
Derrick Henry, where we see these dramatic drop offs, and like, I was looking at the Pro Football Reference page for Eddie George the other
Hmm.
day, like a similar played for the Titans, big
Right.
back, powerful,
Yep.
and like had these massive workloads. So like kind of an interesting career parallel there. And when Eddie George hit his age 28 season, like he was never a big, like his yards per carry were never particularly pretty, even in the prime of his career. But I think he went from like 3.7 when he was age 27 to like 3.0 at
Oh
age
wow.
28. Like, and he still had a lot of usage and was valuable just because he touched the ball so many times that year. But like, there was a big efficiency drop off. Like, I'm worried we see something similar with Henry. Probably another guy who could benefit from more judicious usage.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of cool that like we saw him start to catch the ball a little bit this
Yeah.
year before he got hurt. And like obviously just a monster when he's healthy. I just worried that like, that the Derrick Henry we've been seeing, there might not be that much of that Derrick Henry left.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think we've been worried about that for a few years.
Yeah.
He's bucked it so far, but yeah, it's a risk for sure. But I think and this is just our running backs. I think for me, if he falls to the late first round, I'll be happy to take him. I'm not going to take him in the first half of the first round, but yeah, he's a guy with big. I wanted some exposure to because of his upside.
Yeah.
For me, my fourth is actually Eckler. I'm very nervous with Eckler because of his injury stuff, and I think I'm over nervous. He hasn't been that injury prone, but it just feels like he's always either hurt or almost hurt. But what a huge year, and what a great quarterback to have with you, and he's a great receiving option. I just, he's not getting enough touches between the tackles. That's not really his thing as much, but because of the two-way threat, I have him up at 4.
Yeah, I've got him at 5, so I'm
Okay,
I'm
we're
kind of
close.
there. Yeah, I'm just a step behind you here, Kevin. And like as you said, I mean, yes, he's kind of another injury risk, smaller build, same as Christian McCaffrey. And it was great that he handled the ball as much as he did this year and stayed relatively healthy. But I
Hmm.
think we've seen the Chargers, like we saw them draft Josh Kelly in 2020. We saw them draft Larry Roundtree in 2021. Kelly kind of sucks. It seems like Roundtree, couldn't get on the field, so he might suck too. But it seems like they're trying to find that guy who can take some of the early down strain off
Yes.
Eckler. Like
The Melvin Gordon.
yeah, like I wouldn't be surprised if they just said, the hell with it, I'm going to do it in free agency this year, and like found maybe it will be Melvin Gordon and Eckler running it back. But yeah, so like Eckler can be valuable even as that guy who's like the satellite back plus. Like he
Right.
does all the third down duties and splits early down work with someone else. Like it's probably best for everyone if he only gets like 180 carries a season, averages 11 or 12 carries, but catches the ball 5 or 6 times a game.
Exactly. If he gets the receptions, that's great. Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
what I'd worry about if he's splitting time, with when Gordon was there, Gordon was getting almost as many targets as Eckler. So that's what
Right.
made he really lost a lot of value. So it'll be interesting. I'm nervous because of, like you're saying, that it seems like they want that second back. That drafting him this early feels a little anxiety ridden, but
Yes. Yeah. Especially in best balls, like right now where we don't know how things are going to
right.
fall in the off season. Yeah. There's a little risk there.
Yeah. So he's your fifth. My fifth is actually Najee. Najee Harris. I think Najee showed a lot this season with a really bad quarterback situation, and it's clear that Tomlin wants him to be the centerpiece of the offense in a similar way with Henry. With the Titans, Najee also showed he's a great pass catcher. I don't think he's like Jonathan Taylor dynamic. His athleticism's not quite there, but really solid back, and I'd be happy to have him, in the first round this season.
Yeah, so I'll just weigh in on Najee real quick. Although he's not my six. He comes a little later for me.
Okay.
So many times that the top running backs are tied to like good offenses, and like I just don't think there's any chance Pittsburgh has a good offense next year. They're going to be
Fair.
Yeah, they're going to have some sort of below average quarterback, Mason Rudolph or some rookie. Like almost best case is, unless you think an Aaron Rodgers trade is realistic, and I'm not sure I do, but like Jameis Winston.
Yeah.
So I'm worried about that. I'm worried that their offensive line is so bad that it's just like a major multi-year rebuild there. And I'm kind of worried that like there's just not, we didn't see much breakaway potential from Najee. I think like before that regular season finale against the Browns, like his longest run of the season was 20 yards. So he's got to be this volume monster to continue to be valuable. And the more volume you get, the greater the risk of injury. So like, it's kind of this, I love that he has the run catch versatility. He's a great pass catcher for a bigger dude. And I love that about Najee. I wish his situation was better. I still think he's absolutely a top 10 guy based on volume alone, but like, I think everyone's going to like him a little more than I do.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, the only counter argument I'd say to the Steelers sucking at quarterback is that they suck this year at quarterback.
Very
can't
fair.
get much worse. I mean, Roethlisberger's a good manager, and he's smart, but yeah, his arm was pretty much gone. So, but again, he's not turning it over. He did a good job holding on to the ball. So you can certainly get worse in that area.
No, you're right though. I mean, there's almost no place to go but up, I think.
Well, there is Mason Rudolph, though. That would be down, I think. Who would be your sixth?
It's Cam Akers. And
okay, wow.
I'm almost surprised, when I was putting together rankings, because like I know a lot of people just love Cam Akers, and they, flipped out and we're just so excited about him in that wild card game against the Cardinals when he, the numbers weren't great, but he had a couple long runs called back. He just missed like a long catch on a wheel route, I think. And and like, really over the entirety of the playoffs so far, like it hasn't been that pretty. He's averaged 2.8 yards a carry. Granted, he was going against two of the tougher run defenses in the league in Tampa Bay and San Francisco. What does it for me though, Kevin, is just that like we know this is going to be a good offense. I mean, like Sean McVay had this offense humming with Jared Goff at the controls a couple of years ago, and and Todd Gurley was putting up monster numbers at the time. And we've seen different guys cycle through this offense. Like we saw Darrell Henderson have immense value in the first half of the season. We saw Sony Michel have immense value coming down the stretch. And then as soon as Cam Akers gave us that little, like, that little taste in week 18, all of a sudden they just flipped the switch and Cam Akers is like McVay's guy from that point on in the playoffs, the most important games, of your season. And like Cam Akers was his workhorse back. So he's going to be the workhorse in a very good offense. And, it's almost like a talent agnostic thing for me, just that they obviously think highly of this guy and it's a great offense, but I do believe in the talent and I like that he's a pass catcher in addition to like a guy with speed and power as a runner.
Yeah, I love Cam Akers. I had him in my, I think he was in my top 5 running backs coming into this season. I had a ton of him before he went down, so that was crushing. But I guess I would say he would be about this high for me if I knew he was going to be their top guy and get, like his workload he has been in the playoffs next season. It seems like, McVay just keeps switching around. I know Akers got hurt, so we didn't get to see what would have happened this season, but I just worry that, we're gonna split time with this guy, or that he's gonna even save him. Like his rookie year, it seemed like he saved him for the playoffs and refused to kind of commit to him until the end. Maybe he just didn't know till then. Maybe he wasn't ready till then, and now he is. I hope that's the case because I think he's a super talented back. But yeah, he was one of my just missed out on the top 10. So that's one of our bigger changes. And how about my 6 is actually Joe Mixon. I don't love Mixon in many ways, but I think it's one of those volume play guys. I think he's also good, even if he's not great. He's one of those 3.5 yards a carry kind of players, it feels like most years, but he's a good pass catcher, again, tied to an excellent offense. The Bengals are another team that seem to like to work in multiple backs, but yeah, I feel like he's one of the safer options at back. So he was my number 6.
I'm with you. He's my 7. And, we've seen him fall off a little with rushing ever since Riley Reif got hurt in early December. Like the Bengals offense just hasn't functioned as well. He had like 88 rushing yards against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. And I think that was like his highest rushing total since like week 12 or something like that. So, but we did see him catch more passes late in the season. So he kind of floated his value that way. Yeah. And like run catch versatility. He's kind of established now that he can shoulder a pretty heavy load and stay healthy. The offense is going to be terrific with Burrow, and I think they're going to pump resources into that offensive line.
Yeah,
like they have to. They don't want Burrow to get killed, which is kind of what's happened this year. Like they led the leagues Burrow, I think, was the only quarterback to take 50 sacks this year.
Oh wow.
So, like we know there are more resources coming there, and that's going to benefit both Burrow and Mixon.
Yeah. That's good. Yep. Who would be your? Oh, you said Mixon was your next.
Yeah, he's 7 for me.
Okay.
Who's your 7?
So my 7th is actually Dalvin. So he fell.
Okay.
You had him all the way at 3. I had him at 7. That was another one of our bigger differences. I think for me, Dalvin just fell a little bit because of the injury concerns and because of the age getting up there. Not sure whether I trust Cousins to lead a great offense, but like you said, so much upside with the receiving. So yeah, that's the only reason he fell for me. Who would be your number 8?
Nick Chubb, probably top 3 on talent alone. Just the safe option. We know that he's not a prolific pass catcher. We know that Kareem Hunt's going to cut into the workload a little bit, but I mean, just such a safe floor with Chubb because like the talent is undeniable. It's a really good offensive line. Just kind of a safe guy, a safe early second rounder.
Yep, I agree. And again, he's another guy that if they commit to him and not use Hunt as much, he would be way higher.
Yeah,
he actually was another one that just missed out on my top 10. I went a little off the board like your Cam Akers with my 8. I went Javonte Williams. This is completely based on the hope that Melvin Gordon signs elsewhere. If Williams is a 3-down back, I think actually, if Gordon leaves, I think Javonte will go even ahead of this. I think he'll go 4th or 5th at running back, just because the talent was fully on display this year. Great balance, great tackle breaking ability, plenty of speed to take it to the house. He can catch the ball. He can kind of do it all. So I really love the talent.
Yeah, I'll give you my 9 and 10 since probably a good time to do it. Like Najee is number 9 for me, and Javonte is number 10
Okay,
for me.
cool.
And 10 feels like kind of a placeholder spot for Javonte
Yeah,
because like we want to see what happens with the Broncos in the offseason, right? We want to see if they sign any significant free agent running backs, if they draft anyone, kind of how is the dust going to settle? Is Javonte like clearly this guy who they're setting him up for a 3-down role, or at least, you know, all the early down work, and maybe they bring in some sort of you know, satellite back to occasionally spell him on 3rd downs, a
right.
Naheem Hines type.
Yeah. That's cool. You have him close to where I had him. I think he's going to be one of the most the biggest fluctuations on draft boards, right? Like he'll go first round sometimes and late third sometimes. It'll depend. My 9th and 10th are actually Swift and Kamara. I had a really hard time ranking those guys. I feel like Kamara could be the 25th best back or the 3rd best back. Just really hard to rank him based on who's quarterback. And I think obviously the talent's still there. He's still young enough. Obviously, great pass catcher. Swift, I just love the talent. I love the upside potential, even though they're another one of those teams that refuses to commit to one back. They like to use multiple, but just the explosiveness and the receiving ability pushed them up there for me.
Yeah, Kamara and Swift were my 11 and 12,
Okay.
the guys you just missed. And I had Kamara at like 8 or 9, but now I think he's probably looking at a suspension after his Las Vegas episode. Probably not going to be smiled upon by Roger Goodell that he is getting into a you know, major brouhaha at the Pro Bowl in the NFL events.
That's true.
So,
yeah, that'll probably push him down.
yeah, you know, even if the legal stuff, if someone gets paid and things go away, like I think there's probably going to be some discipline by the league, and I'm guessing at least 2 games. Plus, you know, as we talked about, we want the running backs tied to the good offenses, and what's that offense going to look like with them? So
it could be Jameis again. I don't know if you think that's likely, but
it could be. It could be Jameis. It could be like some combination of Taysom Hill and one of the rookies. It's
it's ugly. Yeah.
I know. So I like Jameis might be best case scenario.
Right. Yeah. My next few beyond that were actually Barkley. He was in the mix there, and then Chubb and Akers, as you had in your list, and then Antonio Gibson was the only other guy we didn't mention. That was kind of in my top 14. So
yeah, Gibson was like 14 for me, and then I think I also had Montgomery and J.K. Dobbins as top 15 guys.
Yeah, I like those guys too. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, well, thank you for going through that with me, and hopefully it's helpful for our listeners as they try to drill down where they have these guys ranked and how, you know, where they want to draft them. Really appreciate you coming on and chatting with me. It was a lot of fun. Before we head out, can you tell our listeners where they can find you and your work?
Yeah, this was a blast, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. They can find my written work on fantasypros.com, and I have a podcast, Fitz on Fantasy, that usually comes out early every week. And on Twitter, they can get me at Fitz_FF.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I reference Pat's rankings often in my fantasy season when I want a second opinion. I don't ask you. I just look at your rankings, and that's awesome. They're just sitting there on Fantasy Pros. I know you've already thought through all these players in the pool, so you should definitely check out Pat and his work. Please don't forget to subscribe to the pod. If you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review, as that helps spread the word. I would greatly appreciate it. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time.